So I will call the meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock. And we have the minutes of June 18th, 2019 to approve. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes of July 19th with amendment and corrections as
June 18th.
June 9th, what did I say?
July.
June 19th with amendments and corrections as noted.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Page 1. Page 2.
One thing on page 2, it's under the item number 4, where it talks about a motion by Jeff Fairs, and under discussion. Just to clarify, I think the sentence should read, Jeff Fairs said in weighing business aspects and philosophy of the two candidates, and in the remainder of the sentence.
Page 2, page 3. And page 4. Hearing no other corrections, all those in favor of approving the minutes of June 18th, 2019, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And Ted abstains. This is the time for any public comment that anyone has in the audience to make, either things that are either on the agenda or not. So, seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to the interviews and appointments to town boards. And we have two candidates tonight who are asking to be on the planning commission, so I'd invite Gary Miller, whose name actually goes by G, and Amy Brewer to come to the table. And if you would, introduce yourselves, give us an idea of your background, even though we do have your applications in front of us, and why you'd like to be on the planning commission.
I'm currently working at ICE as a IT specialist, and I will be retiring at the end of August, so I'll have plenty of time to not only work with the Energy Task Force, but Planning Commission if you so choose. As it says in my background information, I have had experience on Planning Commission in Essex, not only as a member, but also as the chair of that group. It was the old style Planning Commission where we actually heard applications too, so I think it gives a good background when you're actually trying to create rules and bylaws for the DRB to use in deciding applications. I guess that's a good start. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
My name is Amy Brewer. I have a master's in public health, which is relevant because I work in Franklin and Grand Isle counties in building healthy communities, both in tobacco control, healthy eating, physical activity, which I didn't know when I got my master's degree, but I spend a lot of time looking at the design of a community and knowing that the impact on the community's health and economic development and even, environmental impact is huge. It's a giant result of how a community is designed, whether kids can walk to school, whether they do, whether parents let them, how I move around town. So and I spend a lot of time approaching planning commissions and talking to them and supporting their work. And I thought perhaps it would be nice if I actually put my money where my mouth was and spent some time doing that where I live as well as where I work. So, huge importance of a planning commission. I'm just interested in adding to what Williston does.
So I'll open it up to questions from the board.
Gee, I had a question. Is your educational background says BFA in our education?
Yes,
What is a BFA?
Bachelor of Fine Arts.
Ah, okay. Well, that shows my lack of sophistication from
It's just an art school.
no.
So I'll ask both of you, Amy, you talked about, the strong, healthy communities, aspect. Jean, you took efforts to talk about the energy planning or the energy aspect. So in both cases, would you just talk about that a little bit and maybe how or in what way you would try to foster those two, I'm gonna call them goals, that may not be the best word, as part of the planning, what you would bring in terms of those two goals to the planning commission?
One of the things as I go all around and look at other communities, I'm very proud of the work Williston has done to become pedestrian and bike friendly, as well as working towards being transit friendly. And so, as I've lived here for 14 years, I've been able to actually see the gaps filled in so that I could get to my kiddos' daycare on foot with a stroller, and not have to be in the road, which I did for a little while, but then the gap was filled in. And so, as I watch how Williston is a leader in that, in the state, you can then see how people then make those decisions to utilize the facilities that are here and available to them, and how it's designed, even Taft Corners recently, to become more welcoming for pedestrians and bikes. And so as you build it, people then use it, and it changes how we think about and how we move around our town, which then has that energy impact, is if we can get more of us walking and biking and using transit, there's less congestion. I live off of 2A. If that traffic was down, I'd be able to turn left out of my neighborhood, maybe someday. Not yet, but, so I think those two goals are very well connected. I think that, walking and biking is just one aspect of energy, cars are just one aspect of energy consumption. But I think it's a really important, connector.
So, as far as energy is concerned, I think that when I first joined the task force to develop the energy plan, I joined it partly because I'm concerned about, I'll use the term global warming, and what we can do as a town to address that problem. It's a big problem and bigger than our town, but there are things that we can do locally that would help the situation. And I think that as the task force is going through this, we're seeing that at first we talked about, just thermal versus transportation, what we can do in those areas, but I think the rubber really hit the road when we started talking about the development bylaws, okay? And I think there's a lot we can do in the development bylaws to strengthen our commitment to use energy more efficiently and to address the issue of energy generation, making sure it fits well within the town, that there are some places that are better suited for it than others, and we want to make sure that that aspect of our planning is more. I think the urgency there is more. I mean, we address that somewhat in the growth management area, where we have a situation where you get 10 points for that, and there's you can get 10 points for other things too. And one of the things we wanted to suggest is to give it 30 points for energy, because we think the relative importance of energy conservation should factor more into the development bylaws.
If I could follow up, if you don't mind, you both talked about sort of a positive. Is there something, and I guess you can choose not to answer this, maybe there's none, but is there something that maybe Williston isn't doing such a good job with, either that you've found in the town plan, or how we've taken the town plan and adopted ordinances, if you will, out of that town plan?
I'll say that, again, going through the, not necessarily the town plan, because I'm more familiar with the development bylaws, but I think that I would like to see more compact development, and I think it's addressed somewhat in the Williston development bylaws, but making sure that, for instance, the agricultural rural residential district has perhaps less density than it does now. There's a situation, or the line goes along Mountain View Road between that district and the residential zoning district, and perhaps moving that closer in so that we don't have more single-family houses out there, where there's no services for them, other than, obviously electricity and water that is out there, but do we want to, continue that single-family development further out into the countryside? So I think we could strengthen that a little bit.
I'm gonna struggle answering that question, just because
I
I'm
take
not
that as a good sign. Wilson's doing a lot right.
Well, I feel that it is. I find myself talking about that, when I'm going around, but, and I'm not as familiar with the town plan, and I haven't had an opportunity to work with it very often. So, so I don't have any criticisms based on anything I know. I look at development and I ask questions like, there's a lot of empty stores in Taft Corners, in Maple Tree Place, and there's more being built. And so I always wonder how that happens, but that may not be a criticism of how the town plan is being used. I don't know. So I don't have a good answer for you, and I'm sorry to say.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Any further questions? Unfortunately, we only have one position open at this time, and so that becomes our job to determine who's going to serve on it, at least right now. So hopefully we can do that tonight, and you're welcome to stay while we deliberate and see if we can come up with a candidate to nominate. So the floor is open for debate.
Before we actually get into the debate, I'm going to say sort of the obvious, if you will. Once again, we're in this situation where we have two candidates I'd be happy to appoint.
Yeah.
I just can't. So there is going to have to be a choice tonight, and I wish that wasn't the case, but it's the reality of the situation. I guess I'll start. Amy, I liked what you talked about in terms of the healthy communities, and I think that's a great aspect. But Jean was able to, first of all, I think your experience already being on a planning commission, understanding the difference between the old traditional planning commission and this planning commission, your ability to, not your ability, that didn't quite come out right, but that connection you made between the planning commission and the town plan and the ordinances that come out of it is actually critical. That's where the rubber meets the road. And then you threw in, you didn't throw in, you have the energy aspect of it, which to me is important and becoming more important all the time. So if I have to weigh the two, it's going to go in Jean's favor.
Any further comments?
I agree with Jeff, which is awful, because Amy, I just...
It's not awful, and I'm not going anywhere. Eventually, there'll be anher position open, right? So it's quite okay with me.
Which is exactly the type of answer we like to hear.
Well, I have to say, I was on the planning commission, and we were redoing the use tables at the time, and it was awful. So, anyway.
In other words, he's saying, think about the recreation committee.
Maybe. But please, I am gonna say that G is the person tonight. But I'm very much asking you please come back because you are obviously very skilled and articulate and, seem like you've got great judgment, so.
Motion
I
then.
sit here and I listen to applicants come now, this is my first year on the board, and, you know, I work in education, and we have what we call job shares, and I can feel that again tonight, where if you could kind of mesh the two of you together, that would be great, because I think you both bring very good foresight to what you presented tonight. You know, I think, the experience kind of speaks for itself, that's not to
No,
say
that's
anything against you. Because I certainly applaud, you know, your outlook on, you know, our town and the positives that are happening. And there's always work to be done, and I hope that, you know, you would come back in, you know, a similar capacity or something different. But I think I'm gonna go with G as well.
Williston has a wealth of talent right now, and a number of years ago, we're looking for anybody to apply for members of commissions and boards. Now, we have 2 or 3 people for each of the positions, so by all means, stay interested. So, looking for a motion.
I'll move to appoint Gary, AKA Gene Miller, to the Planning Commission for an unexpired 4-year term through June 30th, 2023.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed and no abstentions? Well, congratulations to G, and we look
both.
forward to seeing you again, Amy.
Yes, please.
So just so you know, this is my 3rd attempt, so.
That's all right, I got plenty of time.
Persistence pays.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
So before we move on, there's another motion that needs to be made if we wish to reappoint to the Justice Commission, the Community Justice Board, and that's Greta D'Agostino, who we missed on the first time around because she initially said that she was not going to be, would not ask for be reappointed, but changed her mind.
So would the chair entertain a motion?
I would.
I'd move to appoint Greta D'Agostino to the Community Justice Board for an unexpired 3-year term through June 30th, 2020.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and we'll move on to number 5, the FAST agreement. And Eric, I think you're going to lead us through this. It's not much different than it has been in the past.
It's, for those watching at home, it's an annual agreement that the town puts together, and makes with the Williston Hillhawk Snow Machine Club to use public lands, permit the snowmobiles on trails to cross over the town-owned lands. So every year, the Conservation Commission usually review and weigh in along with the Public Works Department. This year, there really are no substantive changes from last year's agreement. There's just a minor administrative change that VAST had that's reflected in the beginning. And that's just regarding, you can buy a temporary 3-day or 10-day pass online now, so you just need to have proof of purchase of that or a sticker. So that's the only change. There's a suggested motion for the board if it wishes to move forward with this again. Staff has no objections.
Any questions for Eric on this?
So I think I said this last year too, I miss them coming in.
Yeah.
They used to come in.
They used to, that's right, a number of years ago, they used to. So if there's no questions or comments, the motion again is in order.
I'm sorry. I'll move to approve the use of public land by the Williston Hillhawks and the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, and to authorize the manager to sign an agreement for such use for the 2019 to 2020 season.
Made and seconded, is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to the annual employee wage adjustment reconsideration. So Rick, a few words on that.
Sure. This is an error we made at the staff level. It's a rounding error. When we and partly it's due, we had a changeover in finance directors, but in the budget, we put in 2.1%. And when we do the calculation for unions, we've always rounded up to the nearest 0.1%. And in using this index, of course, we've been consistent for both fire, police, and non-union. And this year, it was 2.16%. And so if you round that, it is really 2.2%, which is what we have to give the police and fire unions. And when I looked to see what I recommend, I looked to the budget and it said 2.1%. And so that's what I recommended, but it wasn't until we did the calculation that we found out that that was rounded the wrong way. So I requested the board consider to withdraw that initial motion, and then I'll follow that up with a second motion after that to approve a 2.2% cost of living increase for non-union employees.
So the procedure would be for a motion to reconsider, it has to be made by somebody who was here who voted with the majority, which is everybody except Ted. And then that would bring us back to the motion that was on the floor at the time, which was a 2.1%. And then we would need a motion to amend that, and then after that, we would need a motion to approve the motion as amended. So,
Before we get started.
Obviously.
Yeah. Okay, just ask a quick question, sorry, Rick. You at one point said we always round up, or at least that's what, okay.
We round the way you normally would think. So if
Yeah,
it was
okay.
2.14, it would have been 2.1%.
Yep, okay.
If it was 2.15, I don't know which way that goes, but 2.16.
Well, that actually was
It
gonna
goes
be
up.
my follow-up question, is what do you do when it's 0.15? And there actually is a rule to that. You would round, in that case, to 2. If it was 2.05, you'd round to 0. That's my understanding, but.
Anyway,
aren't
we don't
there.
have to deal with that
Yeah.
particular issue this year.
Yeah.
It's clearly a round up situation.
Back to the rules of rounding decimals this evening, correct?
Oh, yes. Well, you can tell what some of us jobs or avocations are sometimes by what we get interested in talking about.
so are there any other questions for Rick regarding this? If not, a motion then to reconsider the actions that were taken on June 18th regarding the wage adjustment is in order.
I'll move to reconsider a vote taken on June 18th, 2019 to approve an annual wage increase for non-union employees.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I believe I have to abstain.
One abstention?
I abstain.
Okay. And then the next thing we would need then is a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor to reflect the 2.2%. And anybody can make that motion.
Not sure, somebody else might have picked up more exactly how to word that.
Let's just amend the motion as written in the recommended motion.
I move to amend you said the recommended motion, work with me a little bit here.
Right, you're making a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor right now.
Amend the motion that's on the floor, which what I believe was.
The new wording on 2.2%.
Okay, to adjust, cost of living adjustment for all non-union employees of 2.2%. Okay,
Second.
did that come out clear enough? All right, sorry about that.
Yes. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And now the motion would be to approve the motion as amended, to adopt the motion as amended.
I'll move to approve the motion as amended for a cost of living adjustment for all non-union employees of 2.2%.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we've gotten through.
Who said democracy is not efficient?
We're moving on to approving the Judicial Bureau list, which is in front of us, and Eric, you're gonna talk about that?
Board might recall we updated this last winter at some point, and then we've decided to put on the annual cycle around the turn of the fiscal year, just to make these updates more frequently. The Judicial Bureau list, first off, the State Judicial Bureau is the body that enforces any violation of a local ordinance ticketed by a town agent. And this is the listing of authorized officials in town that can issue municipal tickets based on ordinance violations. So they include public works, zoning, our police officers, fire department for fire violations. So what I've done, we've had a couple changes in the police department since this list was approved last time, so this is just kind of an administrative housekeeping exercise. This has been reflected to show our current police force and other staff that should hold these designations.
Eric, I'm guessing I missed the meeting where this was approved, or however, whatever motion we take on it before. What would, for instance, Bruce, what type of ticket enforcement would he do, for, just out of curiosity? I'm not at all arguing, I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
I can answer that. There's three main ordinances, possibly four, that he's involved with. One relates to stormwater.
Okay.
One relates to water system, the other relates to sewer system. The fourth one, and that may be questionable, is sewer allocation ordinance, because he does have a role in that one too. I don't know if we have any enforcement mechanisms that would involve a ticket, but the other three certainly do.
Okay. And Deb, as the town clerk treasurer, she would be, for instance, receiving taxes or?
She collects dog licenses, I don't know.
Okay,
It asks to list the treasurer on here, so it's.
okay, all right.
Any further questions for Eric? If not, a motion then is in order.
Move to approve the Vermont Judicial Bureau designation of municipal officials.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to Recreation Committee charge update, and again, Eric.
So we're working on a project the next few months to look at all our boards, committees, commissions, and their charges. So we found that some of these charges haven't been updated for a number of years, and in some circumstances, they may not be a formal charge at all. So we're asking staff who works with these groups to bring it before them for an edit. So the first one we have here is from Recreation Committee, and you'll notice one of the major edit at the top here is reformation to be the Recreation and Parks Committee. They've reviewed this. You'll see there's some changes in the red line document in front of you. Staff supports the majority of this with the exception of Article 4.8, and that's referring to the hiring of employees. We'd ask that the board would consider striking Article 4.8 from the charge. We would still ask that the committee would be advising with the hiring of personnel, but it's one of the duties that falls under the town manager's purview, so we don't want to have any confusion there.
And I read the manager's report beforehand, so the word assist with isn't sufficient to kind of move them out of that process, if you will.
Yeah, we felt it could be somewhat
Okay.
ambiguous, saying, they
Yeah.
would likely still be drawn upon to serve on an interview panel or advisory, but.
And if I could just explain maybe my line of questioning a little bit further is, I can understand where they would like to see the charter at least somehow formally include them, even though they know that will happen automatically. So how about a different word change that might say assist with the recruitment of, as opposed to assist with recruitment and hiring of?
They actually, I think they looked at that, is my understanding, and they were considering striking the whole article to begin with.
Yeah.
And at the last minute decided, well, all right, maybe we can change it a little bit. So they don't feel like they have any role in the recruitment process at all. And so why would you put that language in there? That's my understanding in talking with Todd.
Okay, so did you mean that, or I'm sorry, should I interpret that as they don't want to have a role, or they just don't have a role and they do want to have a role?
Well, My understanding is they haven't had a role and they're not necessarily interested in.
Oh, okay,
that piece
okay,
of it.
yeah,
And we've been through the process fairly recently when we hired Todd Goodwin. And I did include, and involve members of the Recreation Committee in that process, and it worked very well. So
yeah.
but that doesn't mean that some future manager might want to follow that process. But really, under the charter, it's the manager's
Right.
responsibility.
Yeah, that part I absolutely get. I guess my point would be is if I was on something like the Recreation and Parks Committee and we were hiring a new director, I would hope we would have a role in that process. And so thus I could see why they would like to have that in the charter, not charter, the charge. I'm just looking what others feel.
They don't want it.
If they don't want it,
Well, I may have overstated that a little bit. The recruitment part is what they didn't feel like they had any role in. I think they do want to participate in the,
the actual selection.
well, they want
choosing
to have
the
some sort of
person.
role in that,
Yeah.
I would say. So I think they overstated that.
Okay, well,
Okay. So then what this is getting to is you want it to be crystal clear what their role is in hiring and not. And by deleting 4.8, it's more clear that it is the manager who makes that decision. You know, you're welcome to seek the input of the committee, but,
And frankly, I've had, not in this town, but another town I worked in, I had a bad experience.
Yep.
And this isn't what's driving this, by the way, but I had a situation involving the Recreation Committee, as it turns out, in another community where I was a manager and I had the responsibility of hiring the recreation director, and I included, as I always do, I think it was the full recreation board. And the full recreation board did the interviews along with, I was participating in the process, and they had a very strong chair, I think it was, who was very insistent that this one person be hired and, or we should start the process over. I didn't agree with that, but I was a young manager and experienced, I went along with the recommendation. Well, the person didn't work out all that well. And the person that I wanted to hire is now the assistant city manager for the city of South Burlington.
yeah.
So, and it was funny when I ran into him in a meeting many years later, that,
I remember you.
anyway, that's not, I mean, that gives you a little bit of sense of what can happen in those situations. But that said, I've come up with different strategies of getting input from board members, without putting myself in a situation where it's their decision or mine, and if I went against them, I'd be going against the full board, and that's not a good position to be in as manager.
Okay.
Well, Section 4 itself says that the town manager retains authority over administrative matters relating to Recreation and Parks Department. How about if we changed 4.8 to, instead of assist with the recruitment, it just said informally advise in the hiring? That's a bit squishy, because if we said advise, that would imply that there's a duty for the town manager to seek their advice, kind of like the Senate with cabinet appointees. But if we say informally advise, that's more of a guidance than it is a directive. So would it say informally advise in the hiring of part-time and full-time staff?
Good.
So if you'd like to make a motion to include that in your motion, perhaps.
So is that,
yep,
The only issue I have with that is I believe the part-time staff involves a lot of seasonal help. And for the most part, it's the director herself that is totally involved in that process. The manager is not necessarily, although I could be if I wanted to, I delegate that. So there's a.
So assist or informally advise in the hiring of full-time staff.
Yeah, I feel better with that.
Okay.
Or do we want to limit it to the director? Yeah.
We only have one full-time staff member.
Right now.
Right, could change.
But, yeah, that, well, I hope it will.
Yeah, that's good.
Probably will change in the near future.
Yeah. All right.
Your word crafting, I see.
The official title is the director of the department?
Yes.
So how about informally advise in the hiring of the department's director? Or the director of the department?
Okay.
Will that change if we have more additions later on rather than, or does that encompass that?
It would only be the director's position that they would be informally advised on. Lower tier positions, their advice would not necessarily be sought.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah. So, I would move
Yes.
to adopt the amended Recreation Committee charge change with subsection 4.8 amended as follows: informally advise in the hiring of the department's director.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to then the Community Justice Board bylaw amendment. And Eric, I think you were on that one too.
Yep. Along the same lines as we just looked at with the Recreation and Parks Committee, the Community Justice Board. So they have a charge and they have bylaws, and this started out with some, I'll focus on issue area 2 briefly of my memo, just some miscellaneous updates, to clean up these documents a bit. And the most prevalent there is removing references to the Administrative Circle of Support and Accountability, COSA. The town no longer participates in that program. So you'll see in the red line documents, we've removed that to update these documents. And then we had a meeting with Krista Lee last month, and we're speaking about administrative processes. Her board is up to 30 members on the Community Justice Board. And we're thinking about, maybe there's an option to think of, on a policy level, some administrative efficiency. So we bring this for the board to consider tonight. Of those 30 members, typically 10 of those are filled by volunteers serving on the youth panel. And these panelists are aged 17 to 25 years old. And we're fortunate to have a number of young adults serving in this capacity. But we've noticed over the years, those can tend to turn over a little quicker. There's life events that come up, high school graduation, going to college, starting work. So the idea for the board to consider tonight is to think about having the center director, in this case Krista Lee, appoint folks who would serve on the youth panel as opposed to them coming and interviewing before the select board. This would be a change. We don't do that in any other boards, but this one is a larger one, so we're trying to think through what may be most efficient to consider this in this circumstance. Also thinking so the board still has, gets to know these volunteers, having a means for them to come before the board maybe once a year to update about what they're doing, why they got involved, what they're getting out of the volunteer work. And we would include in the manager's report any appointments that are made to this youth panel on the board. So the flip side of that is reviewing these documents, want to be consistent and thinking about if there's an issue and someone would need to be removed from the board. So right now the select board has that authority for any town volunteer to be formally removed from a board after following a process. And you can see in the bylaw document, there's a well-prescribed process. If there was an issue with a justice board volunteer, it starts with a restorative process and then some time to work on that. And then if there's finally an issue, the police chief would recommend their removal by the select board. So kind of the other piece of this to consider is, would the board also want the center director to have the final authority to remove someone from the youth panel? Or would the select board want that authority? Part of it thinking that the select board may not be appointing these people, but would they have the authority to remove the people? So it's a policy question for the board to think about tonight. Something different. This has gone, we took this to the Community Justice Board, Chris Lee brought it to them. They're in support of it. Just leave it to the board tonight to see what direction you'd like to go in.
Questions for Eric?
Well, the first will be just a comment of, if we agree to the change where the youth panel is appointed by the director, then I think removal should be by the director. I'm not there yet with the youth panel should be appointed by the director, and let me just explain. I see, I mean, I'm not against it, don't get me wrong, but I see value in, there's a fair amount of responsibility with that position. The youth that are taking that on, to their credit, are willing to take on that responsibility. And I think that step of coming before the select board helps to kind of reinforce that, and is, not that maybe it's the world's strongest experience for them, but it is an experience. It is, I see value to that process and what they get out of the commitment that they are making to be on it. So that's my hesitation here.
Other comments or questions?
What's driving this? I mean, that the youth panel members would serve at the pleasure of the center director?
We've looked at it throughout the year with 30 board members to manage. There can be people wanting to take a leave, people that start out on the youth panel are not able to continue maybe 6 months in. She wants to maintain that membership with other people. They generally have a wait list for these positions. So then it becomes an administrative piece of trying to align schedules to get them to the select board meeting. So trying to think of some way to maybe move that along a little quicker if possible, but it's, Chris Lee's fine either way. We're just trying to think of different strategies to explore here.
Has there been cause to feel like the youth panel members should be removed? Is there a real world experience that happened, or wanted to be, or should have happened?
Not that I'm aware of.
This is more about getting appointed in a timely fashion than getting removed.
Yeah, I looked at the removal piece just to see the language didn't seem consistent. So just an issue to consider, kind of both sides of the equation, I guess.
I agree with Jeff.
Other comments? I think I agree with Jeff as well as having them come before the select board, even though it's pretty much pro forma, to at least give us the opportunity to question them on that. So if we wish to approve this tonight, we would have to amend the motion to strike the words regarding how they're appointed and how they're removed.
Are we able to do that? I mean,
Or do we have to wait for a revision to come to us at the next meeting, a revised charge?
That wouldn't be a problem, because we're meeting in 2 weeks. We can,
That's right, yes.
I think we can get this done. And
Okay.
Okay, let's, I don't know the proper phrase, but table it, that's not
All
right.
right, yes. The motion to table is in order, and so we have a motion. Is there a second to table?
I'll second.
It's a non-debatable question, so all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So we're moving on to manager's report.
I don't have much of a verbal report to add to what I've already provided in writing. I guess the only item I wanted to touch upon is recognize that we've had our library director, Marty Fisk, who has served as the director of the library for the past 14 years, has turned in her resignation. She has accepted a job for the city of Keene, New Hampshire Public Library, which has a much, much larger staff. And there's a lot of advantages. It's a major advancement for her. And I know she enjoyed her job here and was very choosy in looking for positions, and hopefully that will work out well for her. One of the things, it kind of harkens back to the discussion we had on the recreation director selection process. This is complicated far more than that, because well, let me say that before I get into the complication, the process that we used to select Marty Fisk last time worked well. Involved a process that was initiated and managed by a manager, but involving the library trustees. And we had no problem reaching a consensus as to who to hire, and obviously the hire we chose worked out quite well. And I've already talked and met with the chair of the library trustees, and I'm going to be meeting with the trustees next week to talk about the process. And my anticipation is we will follow a similar process and hopefully have a similar result. That being said, for future consideration, the town may want to look at a possible charter change, because the charter has conflicting provisions on this very issue. Under the manager responsibility and authority, it talks about the manager's authority of hiring all full-time employees, of which the library director certainly is one, of the town. There's also a section in the town charter that talks about the library trustees, and the provision in the charter says, and the trustees have the authority provided for under state statute. You get a state statute and it says the library trustees have the responsibility for hiring the library director. So I don't anticipate any problems. We didn't have it before. We won't have it this time, I don't believe. But it's an issue that the board may want to consider in the future. And something I envision, perhaps a change that might, and I'll probably talk to the trustees about this as well, envision a change that would have the manager hiring with consent, which is stronger than the informal provision. But someone has to be ultimately responsible for making the decision, and right now it's not all that clear. Something to consider for the future in any case. But the process has gotten started. The advertisements are out, and with a soft deadline at the end of July, and we'll go from there. I forget when I hope to have someone on board. I think it's right around November 1st. Marty Fisk has agreed to help put the budget together for next fiscal year. She will be finishing up the early August. And we've already made arrangements for staffing to backfill some of the time. We won't be able to cover her position 100%, but we have an able assistant library director who's been with the town, I've lost track, he's probably over 30 years, as a part-time assistant, and she's going to obviously have to increase her hours. And we have other positions that, well, we have one person who's been working as a temporary fill-in, who will be able to continue working some hours, and then we'll have to backfill some additional hours with some of the other people. And of course, the volunteers for the library are a tremendous help as well. So our hope is that we'll be able to continue providing services as we have in the past without any major disruptions.
Thank you. You miss Marty. She was also confident we'll get somebody different but equal in many ways.
That's the goal. So that's all I had on my verbal report.
Can you give us an update on the stormwater coordinator position and whether we're...
Oh, sure. We have, well, 5 applicants. The deadline is coming on, which isn't a lot. The good news is I think there's 3 in there that are very well qualified. And so we're setting up interviews. In fact, actually, we might do the first round later this week.
Yeah, maybe Thursday or Friday. Bruce and I are gonna sort out times for that, hopefully the next day or so.
So we'll see how that all works out. You know, if none of them turn out something we want, I won't hesitate to start over, re-advertise.
Any further questions for Rick? Other business, I think we believe we have a couple of catering permits.
The first is an event scheduled for August 3rd. It's a catering permit, and it's at Mike Isham's barn. It's for a wedding, and it's being catered by 802 Cocktails LLC, and staff has no objections.
Questions for Rick on that? Motion's in order.
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And next?
Next one I have is also a catering permit for August 10th at the same location. The caterer in this case is Woodbelly Pizza, and staff has no objections. It's also a wedding.
Any questions for Rick on this one? A motion? Second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Anything else?
Yes, I have one, it's not a, I'm not asking for board approval tonight, it's a special event permit, and when I say special event, the state special event permit, which means to say it comes under the liquor control. It's for an event scheduled for the end of August. The problem with this one is, as I began to investigate it, I found that it's more than just a short little tasting or something. It's apparently a music festival. Presumably a smaller scale than what you and I might imagine, but it raises all kinds of red flags. And the town actually has, believe it or not, a public festival ordinance that was adopted in 1974. I don't know if it's ever been used. You might imagine why it was adopted back then.
I was gonna say, it's,
But in any case, it has a lot of good provisions in it and things, issues to consider. Some of it, I don't know. But in any case, I've reached out to the owner of the property and suggested we have a meeting, and it very well may be that we can work out a number of the issues and come back to the board for approval on this. It's at the Red Barn, which has a bunch of weddings. So the owner was saying, well, how is this any different from a wedding? Well, there are some potential differences here, and that's what we have to work through. And it may be that the public festival ordinance doesn't apply, because one of the key provisions says it has to be for 16 or more hours. And as it stands now, and I don't have all the information, but the event, I believe, will last longer than 16 hours. So, one option might be that for them to shorten up their event, in which case, then it would be the noise ordinance that we'd be more concerned about rather than public festivals ordinance. There would still be some things, some various issues that we'd have to work out, but it's something we could work out. My question, or my point is, and first of all, bringing this to your attention, but also, most likely, if we can work out the details, this may require a special select board meeting, because right now, it won't be ready for July 23rd. And so I mean, there's an outside chance it could be, but if they drop a lot of their plans and really scale it back, then it may not be an issue. But assuming we need more time to work it out, the next select board meeting after the 23rd is August 20th, which is just nowhere near enough time for them to, get approval on this. So as soon as I feel like we have a proposal to take to the board on this, I'll get in touch and see if we can get a special meeting. It'll be just a one-item issue probably. Shouldn't take very long.
my interest.
Afterwards, if you want, I'll give you some more detail, if you want, because there's I'll explain that later.
Thank you.
Is there any other business anybody has tonight? All right, then we're adjourned. Thank you all.